Hello and welcome to the Week 12 recap in this College Football Revamped Dynasty. Our first game we are going to in the recap session is Auburn at Georgia, a traditional rivalry that doesn't have a ton of stakes for Auburn other than spoiling Georgia's season. Georgia has been very hot after starting 0-2. They have now won 7 consecutive games and are still in a position where they could win the SEC East if they win out from this point forward. Auburn, on the other hand, has had quite a different season. They find themselves in the bottom position of the SEC West with only one conference win to their name. So today's matchup, all for them, is for the bragging rights and spoiling Georgia's season from this point forward. First play we'll see is a 2nd and 4 for Georgia. Auburn is up 3-0 at this point. Carson Beck is in the shotgun. He gets the snap. He's got great protection. He hits his old reliable Lad McConkey, and he has all of the room in the world on the sidelines. He outdashes all of the Auburn defenders. He goes 89 yards to the house, and Georgia would find the first touchdown of the game and go up 7-3 from that point forward. A beautiful throw as Carson Beck is maturing right before our eyes and is looking like a quarterback who could possibly lead Georgia to the promised land. This time, Georgia's up 10-3, 5 minutes to go in the second quarter. A slip and recovery by Beck, able to stand back and fire and hit Oscar Delp 47 yards to the house. They're up 17-3, and now it's the danger zone for Auburn. Can they stay in this game? 2nd and 10, Peyton Thorne looking, scanning, and he gets picked off near the end zone. That is taken back for a slight return by Georgia past the 10-yard line to get back away from the goal line, and Georgia's back in good position. They drive down the field before halftime. 3rd and 2. Let's dump that off to the best tight end in the country, Brock Bowers, from 3 yards out. Georgia goes up 24-6 from that point. Auburn still trying to push in the third quarter. This thing hasn't totally gotten away from them. Peyton Thorne gets good protection, but he's picked off by one of the best defenders in the entire country, Malachi Starks. His second turnover, and that would be all that you would need to see from this game. The Georgia defense was smothering against Auburn, and Georgia was not going to be denied in this game today. The Auburn fans may be disappointed, but they put up a decent enough fight that I don't know if it's going to save a lot of jobs in Auburn from this season, but Georgia right now is a wrecking ball, and they are a team we are going to see highlighted in the main game next week against Florida State. They have proven to have come back from their 0-2 start, and they are truly a force to be reckoned with in a do-or-die game next week against Georgia. You definitely will not want to miss that. Next up on our recap slate, let's go to a traditional rivalry game. Michigan and Notre Dame, two teams that are still ranked, but Michigan and Notre Dame are kind of going in opposite directions. Michigan had a really rough start to the season, and they have gotten hot and won a few games in a row and have worked themselves back into the conference race a little bit. And Notre Dame, not so much. They started out hot, but they have hit a big snag on the road inside of their Big Ten West standings that you can see here. They are still one of a few teams with one loss with Michigan State, but Michigan State does hold the tiebreaker since Notre Dame lost the head-to-head. And then Michigan, those 3 early conference losses are holding them back, but there's still plenty of time for them to play spoiler, and a win against Notre Dame would go a long way towards putting a positive taste in their mouth from this season. First play we're going to see from Michigan, it's a 1st and 10, 2:38 to go. He finds Roman Wilson for 26 yards, and J.J. McCarthy looks back and healthy, throws a beautiful ball and puts Michigan up 7-0 early. Here's Sam Hartman on 3rd and goal, down by 7. Plenty of time, rolls out on the pressure that forces a 4th and goal. Notre Dame has to kick a field goal. Michigan still holds a 7-3 lead. A little bit into the second quarter, 3rd and 8 for J.J. McCarthy and company. McCarthy decides he's going to deliver a beauty of a ball, this time to Tyler Morris from 30 yards out, and Michigan has an early 14-3 lead. Again, another 3rd down. Still in the first half, Michigan up 14-3. McCarthy goes under center this time. Beautiful drop back, hits his man. He's got all the room in the world. Is he going to get to the end zone? No, he will be 1 yard short, but you can see this Michigan offense was incredibly explosive. They would punch it in from there, and they would ultimately boat race Notre Dame off the field today. Notre Dame just had no business being on the field with them. Michigan was hitting on all cylinders, and that offense looked beautiful around J.J. McCarthy. He protected the ball, he got the much-needed yards on the ground when they needed it, and Michigan delivers probably the finishing blow to Notre Dame's chances to win their Big Ten West division this season. And when you look at the stats after the game, it was total domination on that part. Notre Dame just had more passing yards because they were forced to, because they went down by 3 scores so early. So a good win for Michigan, good effort on their part, and we'll see how Notre Dame recovers after this one. It's not the way you want the season to be going, and they still have a couple of big games that we'll highlight at the end of the episode, but this is not what you were kind of expecting from a Notre Dame team that started off the season so hot and had some national aspirations. The next game, another Big Ten game, Penn State at Michigan State. We saw in the last game how big this game would be inside of the Big Ten West standings. Michigan State and Penn State are both battling. Penn State, if they can give Michigan State their second conference loss, they could get themselves into a tie at that point where Notre Dame, Michigan State, and Penn State all have 2 losses. And then it's all up for grabs in the coming weeks. So we'll see how this one goes today. First play we're going to go to is a 2nd and 18 for Penn State. They're getting backed up a little bit, but they are in Michigan State territory. This is a handoff to Katron Allen, who follows beautiful blocking, doesn't even get touched on his path to the end zone. Penn State takes an early 7-0 lead in East Lansing, not even 2 minutes into the game. Then we go to a Penn State possession. They're up 21-7. Things have gone back and forth a little bit. We're a little bit before halftime. Drew Allaire finds a beautiful throw to Dante Cephas, and he has really improved as a thrower as the season has gone on. And then to finish off that drive, might as well hit Katron Allen from 3 yards out, and that would put Penn State up 28-7 at this point. Michigan State pushes a little bit in the second half, 2 minutes to go in the third quarter. Noah Kim able to punch this one into the end zone to Tyrell Henry from 9 yards out, and they cut the lead to 14, and they're going to need some defensive stops if they want to get back in this one. An example, 2nd and 20 for Penn State. Big opportunity for Michigan State to keep backing them up, but Drew Allaire throws a beautiful ball to Liam Clifford from 32 yards away. That's a touchdown. Allaire has one of his better games in the season. Penn State closes out Michigan State in their own house, dashes some of their hopes as Michigan State looked like they had the inside track, and the Big Ten West continues to be unpredictable. And Penn State is a team that is starting to turn things around after a recent skid. I think they are just as dangerous as anybody in this division, especially when you have a game like that from Katron Allen. And Michigan State isn't out of this. They're just in a really rough spot at this point, and they're going to need some things to go their way if they want to win the division. Final game we're going to get a live look in at today is Washington at UCLA. The implications are pretty obvious for today's game. Washington is one of the lone undefeated teams in the country. They want to keep on winning. UCLA wants to spoil that. We have 2 pretty great offenses that have good offensive numbers and put up points. So we'll see what today's matchup looks like between the two. I think their defenses could be surprisingly potent and provide a little bit of trouble for these offenses. First play we'll look at, though, is UCLA threatening to score. That's a touchdown pass to Logan Loya, and that gives UCLA a 17-14 lead. Next time we check in, though, is a 3rd and 5 in the third quarter. UCLA down by 4, looking to make a play. This one's going to come a little bit short. Washington makes the tackle. They are able to force a 4th down and a field goal. Then Washington, a couple of drives later, we're into the 4th quarter. They're only up by 4, but they're able to punch it in with Daniel Nata, really doing what they can on the ground in these sloppy conditions. That puts Washington up 31-20. Now, UCLA needs a stop. They're down by 5. It's a 3rd down. Michael Penix finds his man. He's able to push really close into the end zone, or close to the end zone within 5 yards, gets a 1st and goal. That would be all Washington would need. They could punch another score in from there. That 2-score advantage would eventually lead Washington to another victory. They advance and they move to 10-0. UCLA put up a decent fight in today's game, but ultimately Washington was able to keep total control. Now let's look at some scores from around the country and see how things shaked out around the country. Georgia Tech beat Clemson 28-17 as Clemson is 3-7 and not good, Bob, not good at all. Then we have Florida beating South Carolina 27-24. Florida gains their bowl eligibility. South Carolina will need to win their last 2 to get there. Ole Miss beats Troy. We saw Georgia beat Auburn 37-13. And then Mississippi State beat Alabama 24-13. I think Mississippi State is going to hold the crown as the most surprising SEC team this season, and deservedly so for how well they played. Then we have Penn State beating Michigan State 45-21, Michigan beating Notre Dame 34-13, Iowa beating Wisconsin 34-31. Then we have Louisville winning 35-19 over a very good Minnesota team. Air Force, 7-3 Air Force, if you might add, 17-14 over Purdue. Kentucky wins 17-3 over Pittsburgh. West Virginia loses 24-20 to Indiana. Yikes. Ohio State beats Illinois 44-17. They stay undefeated. And then SMU beats Cincinnati 31-21 in a game that I'm sure was great to watch or something like that. But good win for SMU. If they win their last game, they will get to bowl eligibility. So there's something to be gained there. Oklahoma beats Iowa State 35-21. Arkansas wins 41-17 over Nebraska. Missouri beats Kansas 31-24. We already saw the SMU and Cincinnati game over in the Big Ten where SMU won 31-21, but point still stands about them in their good season that they've had so far. Then Texas beats Oklahoma State 42-20. Texas still stays with one loss at this point in the season. Kansas State stays with one loss, 42-28 over Tulane. TCU 38-16 over Texas A&M, who's been 500 the whole year. And then Texas Tech beats Baylor 27-20 in a good season for Texas Tech as well at 7-3. Then finally in the Pac-12, we saw Washington beat UCLA 38-33. San Diego State gets a win over Washington State 29-20. San Diego State gets their 7th win of the season and 4th Pac-12 win. Oregon State beats ECU 38-14. Colorado, bowl eligibility bells going off. They win 28-21 over BYU. Colorado State beats Arizona 48-7. Oregon beats Fresno State 42-17 as they are now 8-2. Stanford beats USC 27-24. USC, not a Pac-12 loss, but definitely not a good loss you want on your resume. And then Arizona State beat BYU 20-13. Now let's talk about some conference opportunities, as we'll call them. Let's go through the scenarios of how each of these big divisions can still play out. North Carolina and Mississippi State are tied at the top of their division currently at 6-2, but we're going to have to get into some tiebreakers for both of them. When you look at the North Carolina schedule, they beat Mississippi State on October 19th, so they are going to hold that tiebreaker as long as they win out in their schedule. If they lose, though, Mississippi State will have the opportunity, if they beat Ole Miss, they would get the bid to the SEC championship game if North Carolina were to lose one of their last SEC games. So that's going to be where that situation stands. Pretty cut and dry. Even if North Carolina ends up being the representative, I still think it's a worthwhile season for Mississippi State to get to 8 wins and potentially 9 with beating Ole Miss and keeping Ole Miss out of a bowl game. That still seems like you're getting a lot out of this season. Then if you go to the SEC East, we get our scenario. We play Georgia and Florida with our remaining schedule. Our game against Georgia is a do or die. As you can see, we are the only team that has one loss, but in UCF and Georgia have 2 losses. UCF would need a lot to happen around them to get back into this. To make it very simple, if Georgia beats us, Georgia just needs to finish their business, and they are going to end up being the SEC East champion. If we win, we will end up being the SEC East champion. Big Ten East, Ohio State, you're undefeated. They only have one more conference game. They can't reach Wisconsin or Kentucky. They are going to be the winners. The Big Ten West, however, is more of a dumpster fire. We have 3 teams with 2 losses and quite a few games still to go for them. Notre Dame has one more Big Ten game, and Penn State and Michigan State both have 2 Big Ten games left to decide this. Notre Dame plays Penn State. Penn State and Notre Dame is going to be the big game next week because it's going to have a lot on its plate because then one of those teams is going to hit 3 losses and one will have 2 losses. Michigan State holds the tiebreaker over Notre Dame when they beat them on October 26th, but lost to Penn State. So if Penn State beats Notre Dame, Penn State will hold the tiebreaker over Michigan State, and they will most likely win the Big Ten West. But if Notre Dame beats Penn State, Michigan State would probably end up being the representative because of that tiebreaker. I know it's very convoluted and it's very in the weeds, but that's kind of the situation we're looking at. I'll definitely remind you when we look into those games of kind of what the implications are, but still a 3-team race in the Big Ten makes that fairly exciting. TCU and Texas. Both teams still have 2 Big 12 games remaining, but TCU does hold that all-important tiebreaker that we've talked about because they beat Texas earlier in the season. So when you look at their schedule, they have to beat 2 5-5 teams in Houston and Baylor. And as long as they don't lose both of those, they will end up being the Big 12 representative from this division. And then Texas, they just need to keep on winning because one more loss from them would automatically eliminate them as well, and they could not win this Big 12 division. But going into the last 2 weeks of the season, they are still technically alive, and we have to respect that. Big 12, other division. This is where it gets pretty cut and dry. We have a 1-loss Kansas State and a 2-loss Oklahoma. And if coincidence wasn't the best thing in the world, it would give us Kansas State and Oklahoma this coming week on November 23rd. And it's very simple. If Kansas State wins that game, they win the division. If they lose to Oklahoma, then they would both have 2 conference losses, and Oklahoma would then hold the tiebreaker. So it's going to be pretty much a winner-take-all. There is a final Big 12 game after that. But if the results hold into the final week of the season, then we have our winners coming out of this game. So Kansas State and Oklahoma is going to mean plenty this next week. Both teams play a pretty pedestrian team in their final week, so a lot will come down to that division in that week, and that's kind of the way you would want to have it. Then let's go to some Pac-12 craziness. Washington has clinched the division. They still have 2 games to go, but even if they lost those final 2 games and stayed there with USC and Oregon, they beat USC and Oregon head-to-head. So their head-to-head tiebreaker would give Washington the advantage. Washington is going to be the Pac-12 representative, and they should be. Look at how they thumped all of these teams. They put up a lot of points. They're fun to watch. Congratulations, Washington, on winning the Pac-12 North. You've been the best team, and you deserve it. It's pretty much as simple as that for this season in Washington. But when we go to the Pac-12 South, it gets a little more interesting. A lot of 4, 5, and 6 losses, but there's Colorado sitting at 2 losses with a 1-loss Utah. Utah has 1 conference game left, and that conference game is against Colorado. Their game against Maryland next week is non-conference, so that won't affect anything, but they will face Colorado in the final week. If Colorado beats UNLV, they are going to set up a matchup with Utah. And if they beat Utah, they would both have 2 conference losses, and they would have the head-to-head tiebreaker. And that means that Deion Sanders could possibly get himself into the Pac-12 championship game with a chance at a college football playoff berth with a win. I don't know if I want that, but I like that the possibility is still alive this late in the season. So let's hope, for the sake of everything, that Colorado beats UNLV, and that game against Utah means something, because I think that could be a really fun scenario. And then we have Florida State and Georgia, next week's big matchup. We see how all the ratings break down. Georgia's got quite a few arrows on their side, but I'm still excited to see that turnover differential. Is quite scary if you see that at the bottom, but we'll see how things turn out. I'm very excited to see how the game goes and how we match up with them. Seeing their defense play against Auburn this week, they were very fast, and they made plays. And if they make some plays against our offense, I could see us going into a hole early, but I'm not going to plan on that. I'm just going to plan on doing what we usually do, and it's going to be a fun game. Winner will most likely win the SEC East, 95% chance, probably at that point. Everybody just has to take care of their business, but, nothing is a given, and that's what makes college football fun. Thanks for tuning in, and go Notes.